12 years ago, I started teaching college classes to male inmates in the Rhode Island State Prison System. And the first thing I do when I have a new student in a group of students is I ask this question: how many of you were good students in school? No hands go up. How many of you graduated from high school? Out of a class of 20 students, 1, maybe 2 will raise their hand. The good news is that if somebody arrives at prison and they haven't finished high school, they can start working on their GED. And once they get their GED, they can start taking college courses, which is what I teach, and then eventually they can earn their associate's degree. This is a photograph of a graduation ceremony at the prison with some of my students, where they are receiving their associate's degree from the Community College of Rhode Island. As I started teaching at the prison, an interesting thing started occurring. Inmates would come to me and they'd say, "Professor, good news, I'm finally getting out." And I'd say, "Congratulations," and they would get out. But then a year or two later, they'd be back. And I really started digging into this issue of recidivism. Nationally, 44% of inmates that are released from prison are back in prison within 1 year. 68% are back within 3 years. And 77% of inmates that are released from prison are back in prison within 5 years. And I wanted to understand why. And it turns out there are a number of reasons. But primary among them is this: nobody will hire them. Unemployment. They can't get a job. It's called the prison penalty. 43% of black women that are released from prison are unemployed. 35% of black men that are released from prison are unemployed. 23% of white women and 18% of white men that are released from prison are unemployed. As a society, what we're saying is that if you commit a crime and you do your time, that you cannot support yourself in a legal way. And I understand the concerns that business owners and business leaders may have. They're concerned about the unknown. They're concerned about safety. They're worried about what their other employees will think. But aren't we safer as a society when people that have been incarcerated get out of jail and they can support themselves and their families legally? Because of this, we started an entrepreneurship program at the prison 4 years ago, because we thought, if nobody's going to hire these formerly incarcerated people, that perhaps we could teach them to create their own work. And I'd like to talk to you about one of the classes I teach. It's called the design process. So here's the setup for the class. The inmates have to redesign and improve upon an existing assistive mobility device. In this case, they worked on walkers, wheelchairs, canes, and crutches. The first step in the process is the empathy phase. And so typically what happens is a designer will go out and observe people using these devices. They'll interview them, they'll talk to experts, and they try to gain insights on things that are working and not working with the devices. They also try to figure out where the pain points are that people are experiencing with those devices. Obviously, my students are incarcerated, so they could not go out and do the observation. I also teach at Bryant University, and I had my university students be the eyes and ears of the inmates. And they went and they visited senior centers, they visited nursing homes, assisted living facilities, they went to sports rehab facilities. They observed, they asked questions, they really probed to find out where the pain points were. And then they wrote a series of one-page papers outlining their observations. The students gave me their papers, I made copies of them, and I gave them to the inmates. And the inmates devoured the information, And then we went to the next phase in the design process, which is the ideation phase. In my classroom at the prison, I've got 4 big whiteboards. I had lots of markers. I had Post-it notes. And the inmates came up with hundreds and hundreds of different ideas of things that they could do to improve upon those assistive mobility devices. They drew little pictures, and then they started grouping the pictures together in certain categories. And then they moved on to the next phase, which is the prototyping phase. So in this phase, they took the best ideas and they started drawing really detailed images of the prototypes. And I'd like to share some of their work with you today. I don't want to oversell what you're about to see, but I want you to think about this. These are all drawn by hand by men who were terrible students in school, most of whom never graduated from high school. I think they're beautiful. I think they're functional. I think they're spot on. And most importantly, I think they address the pain points that the university students had pointed out. So we're going to start with walkers. What emerged early as the major pain point in walkers was this idea that when you're using a walker, you're hunched over and it hurts your back and it hurts your neck. And because your arms are holding on to the sides of the walker so tightly, you get pain in your wrists and in your elbows and in your shoulders. So the first place they went with it is they said, well, why don't we just create a walker where somebody can stand up straight and walk? The second generation of that was, well, what if we create a stand-up walker that actually has handles on it, and you can use it almost like a cross trainer so that your arms are moving? The next walker dealt with the pain point of the safety issue of going up and down stairs. And so I think this is a really cool design. It's basically the legs and the wheels scope up and down. So you can be at the top of a step. You can have one set of wheels on the top step. The second set on the next step down, it's locked in place, and it allows you to move the walker forward so that you've got more safety going up and down. Then they moved on to wheelchairs. This is called the Moto Spring chair. I think this is the most beautiful design as far as the care that it took to do this by hand. But there's 3 innovations to this chair. If you look at the top, you'll see that instead of the handles scoping back, they're pushed in. Because the pain point that the inmates had found was that people that push the wheelchairs, they tend to have pain in the carpal tunnel area. And by moving it in, it would get rid of that pain. And then another pain point is that in wheelchairs, people complain when they hit a crack in the pavement or on a sidewalk, and they get hung up on the crack. And so below the chair is a little box, and that's a little electric motor, similar to the ones that are on bicycles. So if you get stuck, you push a little button, and it gives you a little boost over the crack. This deals with that same pain point, but this chair, it's got the lever right in the middle. And if you look below it, you'll see a gear and a chain system similar to what you see on a bicycle. And so if somebody gets hung up, they reach forward, they pull the lever back, and it moves the chair 2 feet forward. This is called the crane. It is a fully retractable cane. One of the pain points that people had when using a cane is if it's dark outside, they can't see. And they don't want to have a flashlight in their hand. And so this has a flashlight built into the front of it. This is the crane extended. Halfway down, you'll see another little rectangle there. That's a storage compartment where the person using it can put their ID, can put medication inside it. But I want you to look at the bottom of the cane, and I'm going to zero in on that. You see this spring. It gives a little more bounce to the cane. But on the other side of it, one of the pain points was that during icy conditions, it's very unsafe to use the cane. And so in icy conditions, what the user can do is just take the cap off the bottom of the cane, and what it shows is a metal cleat that allows you to grip the ice. This is my favorite design. It's a redesign of the crutch. It's unlike any crutch on the market today. It's different in every way. And we all know what the pain point is in crutches. For those of us that have been on crutches, it's the rubbing underneath the arm. And so at the top, the padded area, it's not static. It's on a tracking system so that when it's under your arm, the pad actually moves with your arm so there's no friction there. The other thing is the foot is like a prosthetic foot used by athletes. It gives the crutch a little bit more bounce to it. The crutches that we use today, they were developed hundreds of years ago. It's a plant and pivot design. My Bryant University students attempted to find a company that would fabricate this for us. Our plan had been to get it fabricated, have the students go and test it with people who are on crutches, get feedback, give that feedback back to the inmates, and they would iterate and come up with new designs. We were not able to do that, but I'm still holding out hope that we're going to be able to do it. Just a quick funny story. About 3 days ago, I was sharing this presentation with the inmates that designed these. And one of the inmates raised his hand and said, "Professor, how much money am I going to make off of this?" I said, "Absolutely nothing, but I'm not making any money either." But you've learned how to design a product. So here's an insight that I got out of working on this project. Typically, designers are the observers. And I think what happens is when the designers are the observers is sometimes a designer can see something and think that it's really cool. And then what they start to do is they start to come up with ideas in their head and design, and the observation stops and they miss something. That did not happen with the inmates. When you're reading something, I think it's much more difficult to design in your head. So what are the takeaways? Obviously, it's jobs. I would just say this, as a society, we have a responsibility to make sure that people that are released from prison, that they can get jobs. I will say, from personal experience, the saddest time in prison is visitation night, where mom and the kids show up to see dad. And I look at dad and I say, how's dad going to be able to support himself, let alone help support the family? The second thing is we need to understand what the crime is. About 3 years ago, we had a discussion panel at Bryant University where we were focusing on this issue of how do we get jobs for people who are formerly incarcerated. And we had somebody from the prison system who said, I would hire somebody that has been convicted of murder too over anybody else being released from prison. And people were aghast. They were like, he just said, we're going to hire a murderer. And he said, what most people don't understand is that sometimes people who are convicted of murder too didn't kill anybody. They didn't pull the trigger. Sometimes it's a drug deal gone bad. And some 18 or 19-year-old kid is selling drugs. And I'm not excusing that in any way, but they're selling drugs. A fight breaks out, somebody else pulls out a gun, and somebody gets killed. But because they were in the process of committing a felony when somebody died, they're charged with and they're convicted of murder too. He said the average sentence for murder too is 40 years, 20 to serve. And now these guys are 38 or 39 years old. They're super smart. They're super committed. They never pulled the trigger. They've got a college degree, and they just want to have a life. My ask is that any business owner or business leader that would consider the possibility of hiring somebody who was formerly incarcerated is just call the parole department at the prison in your state. And they can share information about which of the inmates would be best to work with you. I think the reason that many of these designs are so beautiful is that the inmates have purpose. They know they're getting out, and they want to believe that they can create their own work. They've also got focus. They don't have smartphones. They don't have video games. They don't spend hour upon hour wasting their time binge watching Netflix. And finally, they've got plenty of time. They've got 24 hours a day. This chart represents the 52 weeks in a year. Each box is 1 week. If any of you were to peel off 1 hour a day, 7 hours a week, over the course of a year, that equals 9 40-hour work weeks. as represented in red. Imagine what you could create in 9 40-hour work weeks. Imagine what you could design in 9 40-hour work weeks. And I'd like to end with this. George Lucas. He wrote the Star Wars trilogy. He directed Star Wars. He wrote Indiana Jones. He created Lucasfilms. He sold that to Disney for billions of dollars. George Lucas was a terrible student in school, not unlike my students. George Lucas graduated from a community college, just like some of my students. And he said, all of us live in cages with doors that are wide open. Now the inmates are in cages, their doors are locked. And look at what they've done. What I'd like to ask you to do is step outside of your cage, find your purpose, reduce distraction, find the time, and do something really great. Thank you.